Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to the Simply Strategic Ministry Podcast. My name is Landon, and I'm going to be your host today. Today, we are interviewing a friend of mine named Greg Basch. Now, Greg, he is a coach with Focus 412, which focuses primarily on partnering with leaders to develop healthy staff, structures, and systems to build the body of Christ. And so we're going to talk a lot about the dichotomy, the seemingly paradox between health and growth. Because there's a lot of leaders who've only been taught to grow, but don't really know what it looks like to be healthy. And then there's a whole lot of leaders too who are so focused on health that they don't know how to grow. Greg, he was in charge of multi-site expansion at Elevation Church, one of the nation's and the world's largest churches. But now he is a coach where he is talking about spiritual formation of leaders. How do we develop holistically? So I am excited for you to hear this conversation with him today. As always, we are trying to grow this podcast and invest in this podcast. And so if you can, be sure, if you're watching on YouTube, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, comment, drop a question, or drop some feedback. And then if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, please go and, I don't even know if iTunes is even a thing anymore. I think it's Apple Music, Apple Podcast, whatever. Sorry, I'm showing my age here. I grew up with an iPod and iTunes. But wherever you're listening or watching, please help us by giving a rating or review. That will really help us get this word out to more leaders in our community, because as our community gets better, everybody's going to get better as a result. So I'm excited. Let's jump in today with my podcast with Greg Basch. Well, hey, everybody. We are excited to interview my friend Greg. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How are you today, man?
I'm doing good. Excited to chat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, as I said in the intro, you're a coach at Focus 412, and you all really focus on building healthy staff, structures, and systems that ultimately build the body of Christ. So I think where I'm kind of at in my life right now is I have been a part of organizations that, really love to build big, to grow, but health was always, sometimes was kind of on the, back burner, I think sometimes for people. You've been a part of Elevation Church. What was your role at Elevation when you were there?
I had many roles.
Okay.
Started as an associate campus pastor way back in the day, became a campus pastor, got to launch our location out here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina,
Okay.
which is super fun. And then I eventually was a part of the leadership team, and my role was overseeing all of our campuses at Elevation.
Okay.
So that was my main thing. Did a lot with leadership development as well.
Oh, okay. So one thing I love about that is as you follow Greg on Instagram, or you follow his coaching or sign up for his newsletter, you'll see that Greg really cares about health. He really cares about spiritual formation. He cares about, getting the habits. We'll talk a whole lot more into those disciplines here in a little bit. But one thing I love is you care about that, but you also have overseen large swaths of a very growing organization. So a lot of times they get pitted against each other, right? Like growth or health. Do you think that is a true dichotomy, or is that something that is just kind of off base there?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in my younger years in ministry and in leadership, I probably would have viewed health as like a swear word. I would have viewed it as, an excuse to be soft or an excuse to not go hard. And everybody wants to grow. Growing is the whole game, right? How big can you grow? How fast can you grow? And I think that's good, but we do fall into these dichotomies with growth and health, and I think there's actually two of them. One is that you can either have growth or you can have health, as if they're enemies of one another. And then the other dichotomy is, or it may be more of a formula than a dichotomy, but it's that healthy things grow. And I hear both these things out in the church space all the time. And I think that they're both flawed to some degree. I think the way we define and describe, health doesn't necessarily always produce growth. And by the way, unhealthy things can absolutely grow. Sometimes it's cutting corners and compromising so that you can grow faster. Sometimes that's where we land. So I kind of view them as almost more like a graph. Like if you could imagine that the x-axis, or the y-axis is health and the x-axis is growth. They're like two converging elements, and I think the better thing to focus on than growth or health is fruitfulness.
Okay. Yeah.
And in order for me to be fruitful in my life and my family, with my ministry, I need to tend to both growth and health. I'm not healthy if I never grow. It makes me think of, like a stagnant body of water or something like that. There's no movement through it. There's nothing changing. That's not healthy. So there needs to be some version of flow that's happening. But we all have seen, countless examples of how the mindset that we're going to grow at all costs can be absolutely devastating as well. So I think it's a balance. It's something that we need to be mindful of both things, but I think neither are the goal. I don't think God gave us the church so that we could just be healthy, nor do I think God gave us the church just so that we could get more people inside of it. I think he gave us the church so that we could be fruitful and bear fruit through the things he's put in our hands.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, that's what Tim Keller opens up in Center Church, where he just talks about, like, the goal is not faithfulness, the goal is fruitfulness, and the path to fruitfulness is through faithfulness to Jesus. And but I totally feel that, though, of like growth or health kind of being a swear word, especially early on. And I'm 30 years old. I'm 30 years old. So when I first came into ministry, was kind of in the mega church explosion, like not the first, of course, mega church explosion of like the Bill Hybels and Willow Creek type world, but kind of, in the middle of the New Springs and the Elevations and the Mark Driscolls of the world. And so everything was just kind of exploding everywhere. And it was like, that was the path. It was like, it's got to be this, we're going to have 10 campuses in 10 years kind of mentality. And that was like all I knew. Like I was a product of that. And, but you're right. Like health was kind of seen as like, yeah, of course, healthy is just kind of you just got to be healthy. We're not going to talk about how to do it, but that's understood. Why do you think health has become was a swear word? And maybe we can look at the way it's kind of being used now. But why do you think that was the case?
I think everything in the church world operates in cycles. I think everything is swinging on a pendulum, and you can just track the generations of different church movements over the past several decades, and you can see how we swing to one side, and then we realize that we've gone too far, so we try to correct, and then we overcorrect, and now we have to come back. So I think there was so much good out of these. People will call them seeker sensitive, mega church, whatever you want to call it, but a movement of church that was designed to appeal to people that weren't typically interested in church. That was a correction from a prior generation of churches that were very stuffy, that were not very relevant, that were very legalistic. People were sick of that, and those were neither healthy nor growing. So we got this whole new generation of churches that were fun and exciting to attend and interesting, and didn't feel like you had to meet some impossible standard of behavior just to be a part of it. I think so much of that is beautiful, but of course, like everything else, it can go too far. And I think we've learned that. I think we've seen a lot of car accidents along the way that show us that when we're too focused on growth, when we're too focused on just being appealing, it can take us to a bad place. And so I think we are right now kind of at the end of that pendulum swing, and I think we're right now starting to see a coming back. I think COVID helped kind of speed up that process a little bit. And the thing I'm praying for is that we can find a healthy balance, that we can find a healthy medium, and that we don't have to look back 15 years from now and overcorrect ourselves again.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, there's definitely, I grew up, my church tradition was a Southern Baptist background, but it was like big Southern Baptist church, which was highly evangelistic, highly event and program driven. It was always how big's the Sunday school and how big's the choir, and and so the kind of the stream that I'm swimming in now is more of like spiritual formation, Richard Foster, Dallas Willard, the John Mark Comers of the world, and Comer really bringing a taking all of you know the voices of the Desert Fathers and the voices of some of that Catholic mysticism and putting it into a language that really speaks to our culture, and especially just in our exhaustive culture. I think is so good. But I'm starting to see too that soul health and rest and all that is starting to become again another kind of curse word. It's like we almost like. It's almost like we just can't help but overreact to these things. It's just like, no, we don't want to do that. But I think it's so important. So, okay. So in the idea of formation, so, there's always, we've been deformed in a way. The systems of the world have deformed us. Jesus wants us to be formed into his image. But in between those things is what we call counterformation. So there are systems that are deforming us, and there are things that we can do to counterform where the culture is taking us. So let me ask you this. With all of your expertise and all your experience, because again, you are very focused on being healthy and being growing. What do you feel like are some systems? And this, I know this might be a deep end of the conversation here, but like, what do you feel like are some systems that are proliferating the unhealth?
Oh man.
And like everyday leaders, not thinking like we talk to like our audience is like student pastors and campus pastors. We don't have a bunch of we're not thinking high level senior pastor bylaws type stuff, but like just on the day to day, like the systems and the things that we're doing that are proliferating this crisis.
Yeah, I think it is the urgency of our culture. I think we live in a society that is incredibly unique and weird compared to every previous version of civilization throughout history, where technology has given us this ability to be tapped into breaking news and outrage and propaganda and information and comparison to other people all of the time. Technology has given us so much efficiency. And it's so funny. I think John Mark talks about this in one of his books, where as technology and the kind of digital world, was being born, there was a lot of, people wondering, is this going to take away, our livelihood? Are the tools going to be so effective that we as human beings aren't really going to need to work that much anymore? And what are we going to do with ourselves? And now we can look back and just laugh at that, because all it's done is make us more busy and make our lives more full. And that's a broad category that probably has a lot of branches that come out of it, but I do think that that's part of it. And for me, I feel this every single day. I feel like I'm battling this every day of my life, where I wake up and I think to myself, how can I be a great husband today? How can I be a great father today to my two girls? How can I be a great leader and coach to the people that look to me? How can I stay physically healthy? And if I only did those things, that's already probably more than I can do in a day, let alone all the other things I want to do with my life, the friendships and the relationships I want to be cultivating, the trips I want to take, the travel I want to experience. So it's, again, every great thing has its shadow, and I think we're living in the shadow of all these blessings that we have available to us, because we don't really know how to moderate very well. So if we have the ability to see everything in the world through our phone and get access to all the information in the world, we will do it until it kills us, because we don't have a good governor on our ability to just step away and go sit and be with God and do nothing and be in silence. And that's why I think so much of this kind of neo-spiritual formation movement, I think it's beautiful. I think it's so timely. I think it's needed. Of course, we ought to be mindful that we don't take it to an extreme that then we have to overcorrect, but I think it's so good.
Yeah. And I just don't, I get there is a impetus in an older generation always to look at the next generation and say they're so lazy,
Right.
you know. And, but like let's be real. Let's say you picked up, I got a bag behind me, ruthless elimination of hurry here, and you implemented everything that was said in that thing. Okay, and you just did a checklist. You still are not truly counteracting the deformation of a culture that is seeking to destroy and kill everything in your life. Like it's just like I don't know if we can be too serious about it, but I do think it's when it's you go right back to the same paradigm you said. It's when we focus on health and not growth, and we don't focus on both or we don't focus on fruitfulness that we get caught. I think it's really good. So okay, so with that. What are you seeing in the leaders that you're coaching? The guys who are doing it well right now. The guys who are doing both, being deeply formed while being extremely effective and fruitful. What are you seeing as some of the systems that they have in place in their life to maintain those things in tension for fruitfulness?
Yeah, well, I'll say it's hard. I'm seeing a lot of leaders that are seeking that balance, but a lot that are struggling with it because you have so many pastors leading churches right now who came up in the same wave that you described.
Yeah.
They were baptized into a church planting world where growth at all costs is everything. And so now there's a lot of people kind of waking up and realizing the damaging effects of that on themselves, on the people around them. And so we're trying to figure out together, like, how do we start to bring some balance to this force? I think it certainly starts with kind of modeling it yourself. One thing that's become popular is like sabbaticals. It's a big conversation right now. And I think that's great. And I look forward to, being able to take sabbaticals at some point in my life.
Yeah.
I think if you can, it's a wonderful blessing. But I think we, and this is probably true of everything, where we focus so much on the big dramatic thing and not enough on the small daily things. So if you take a 2-month sabbatical, that's wonderful. But if you are not finding ways to take small breaths all throughout your day, if your day is so full, if you're so packed with meetings and conversations and projects and everything, then whatever good you get out of a 2-month sabbatical is going to dissipate very quickly once you come back.
Yep.
I do think that this is going to be, I think that this is very, very intertwined with the conversation I think we're going to have about leadership development. Part of the reason why, as someone in ministry, you may feel just overwhelmed all the time. There's always more to do. There's always somebody else to take care of. There's always more to get done. You feel so full. You feel like you're just running on fumes. Part of the reason for that is because we're not doing a good enough job of developing and then empowering other people to carry the load. So the people who I think are doing an excellent job of this, they're not just making changes in their personal life, but they are building strong teams around themselves that they can trust, that they can release things to, leaders that can make decisions, so that they don't have to wake up every day and go, how do I grow my church today? It's not all on them. And I think that's a very healthy mindset to approach it with.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So, I mean, the taking a breath throughout the day, that for me has been like, that's a system, Now, the Desert Fathers would have called it the daily office or the examine prayer. And like just doing that of taking a walk in between this call and the podcast I'm recording later and just asking, Lord, what are you doing today?
Yeah.
Take a breath, the breath prayer. That is something that I was never taught. I know, have you listened to, there's a podcast out right now. Have you listened to the podcast with Lecrae and Matt Chandler?
I haven't.
That just came out? Okay. There's that one, and then there's a conversation. Anybody listen to this, I need to push this on our socials. There's a conversation between John Mark Comer and Matt Chandler, which is kind of a fascinating conversation where he talks about how Matt Chandler talks about how he grew up where basically with the idea that the body was just a vessel to carry the brain. So in otherwise, like everything we do is logical. Everything we do is empirical. Everything we do is just in our head. And so following Jesus or becoming more like him is really just about learning more knowledge and learning more Bible. And so, but then he realized that he's still so anxious, and he's still like not feeling empathy when there's sin breaking and wreaking havoc. And he just talked about how I learned that I haven't trained my body to actually be able to rest. And, we know psychosomatically that we are made, like we're not just brains, like we're bodies as well. And so just those little breaths, those little systems that people are doing. So like, what are some things in your calendar that's changed from today versus 10 years ago? Like healthier Greg versus go, go, go Greg. What are some things that's changed for you?
Yeah. I had a mentor who helped me so much. He recommended a couple things to me that I've adopted. One is to build in margin time in your morning, meaning if you're showing up to an office, or it doesn't matter if you work from home, the principle still applies, but it's don't start at 8:30 or 9 a.m. with your first meeting. Don't start with looking at your email inbox. You have to plan for and protect the first at least hour of your working day where you can have some time to just think, where you can have some time to zoom out and see what's going on. And we're not even talking about spending time with God. Obviously, that's important as well. I'm just talking from a productivity standpoint. So having margin time to begin the day is huge. Not scheduling back-to-back meetings. That's something I try to do as much as I possibly can. When I was at Elevation, we were a big meeting culture. We loved having meetings, and most of them were fun. But we would just stack them up, and I'd look at my calendar, and I would just get depressed because I would see 6 meetings back to back to back and go, when am I going to go to the bathroom today?
Yeah.
And if I can't even have time for that, then my brain is not even going to have time to process what's happening. So I try to schedule gaps between meetings as much as possible. I definitely try to go on walks, like you said. I have become a huge just student of and believer in that idea that you just shared, which is, our bodies are so intertwined with our brains, also with our spirit. You can't divorce them from one another. So if I'm feeling depleted in my spirit, there may be something I can do with my body that will help rejuvenate me in that way. So those would be a few examples. I could probably keep going.
Well, Huberman's got a great podcast on just dopamine, on having the dopamine reserves, and how real high highs create real low lows. It's like a wave. It's like when a big wave comes in at the beach, there's a giant sucking of the water out. And then after the high of the wave, it goes back down again. And that for me has been a really helpful construct, because basically for pastors, Sunday is the high. And then the next day, and I'm experiencing this now for the first time as a lead pastor, who's not just doing ministry on Wednesday nights, or doing ministry just preaching once every 3 weeks on every holiday weekend or whatever, when the lead pastor's out. But like yesterday, 2 days ago, we're filming this on a Tuesday. We had a really long day of ministry, and we used to schedule. In my world, we used to schedule our most important leadership meetings on a Monday morning. And I am garbage on a Monday morning after a full weekend of ministry. I am, I'm like angry. My dopamine reserves are so low. And all it stinking took yesterday was for me to go swim with my girls at the pool, for me to sit down and color with them, and me just to kind of do something that wasn't, church for a little bit. And I'm like, refill. It's like Tuesday, and I'm like energetic on the podcast with you now. And so that's so true. So, okay. But at the same time, when it comes to developing leaders, which you're incredibly passionate about, and this is where I want to kind of spend the last 10 minutes of our conversation on, we don't necessarily do a great job historically of developing this in leaders. Because it is very much a productivity culture. The church culture has matched the marketplace in that we need quarterly up and to the rights in order to be faithful. And so we don't develop people. So I remember I was sitting in a staff meeting once, and we were talking about what's going to be our wildly important goal for the year. We were going through the 40X type framework of those type of things, and I love that. But like the whole staff was crying out, "We want to be healthy. Like, can we focus on health instead of just getting more people and getting more things built?" And it was there. They received it, but there was a natural pushback. But there's a crying out of young leaders who want this.
Yeah.
So how are you developing? What are you teaching right now to help young leaders develop not just into great bullets and guns to be fired towards a goal, but rather holistic leaders? How are you developing that?
Yeah, holistic is the word. I love it. I draw a lot of inspiration from the scripture where Jesus gives the great commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. I love it because the point Jesus is making is you ought to love God with your whole being. So so then he describes what are kind of the elements of who you are as a human: your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. And I take that as a very simple kind of framework to think about development. Is if I'm developing myself well, which I have to start there. If I'm not developing myself well, I will really struggle to develop anybody else. But thinking, how am I developing myself in these 4 areas of who I am? And then I can apply that same thinking towards developing other people, whether that's volunteers or staff members or whatever. How do I develop people holistically? Because again, all those elements of who we are very linked in with one another. In the church world, we tend to focus very much on, I think, a couple of those areas. When it comes to developing leaders in the church, we tend to really focus on strength, which strength is referring to not just like your physical strength, but your output. What are you producing? It's the energy you're exerting on the world, right? It's productivity, it's skills, it's all that sort of stuff, which obviously are important. But if we only focus on that and we don't teach people how to lead themselves in the area of their soul, then eventually their strength will run out. Or we focus way too much on the mental side of it. I think this is very common, where we will basically shrink the idea of having a relationship with God to a set of like mental understandings that come to us through studying theology or memorizing scripture. Or again, these are all good things to do, but when they're done in isolation, they can be very limiting. So
that's why I hated seminary. That's why I hated being up on campus at a seminary, because it was like, okay, what are we going to do with the rest of our day?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think where churches tend to struggle with developing people is, number one, we tend to develop people out of desperation, meaning we look at our roster or we look at our staff and we go, oh man, we really need a worship leader, or we really need a parking team leader. Let's go find one, teach them what they need to know to do this job, and then we'll set them loose. Because we have a desperate need in the short term. But the reality is, no good development can happen over a short time horizon. Human development is a long game, and I think that's why we struggle with it so much, is because we don't like long games. We like events we can plan that are 2 months out, that are going to give us a quick hit of church dopamine. We like things that give us quick results. It's hard. I mean, it's hard in the church world to even be thinking beyond this calendar year, let alone, hey, what would it look like for us to have, kind of a 10-year discipleship and development arc that we want to take our people through. We don't have the patience for that. And again, it's because we live in this culture that doesn't have an appetite for it. So I think we need to be countercultural in that way. We need to have a longer term view. And then we need to expand even what we think development is. Development is not just taking someone who's a volunteer and getting them into a volunteer team leader role, like, yay, we developed them. no, we may have equipped them for a position, but that's not the same as developing a person. So expanding our view beyond just serving our need or filling our position to asking the question, hey, what did God put inside of you when he made you? And how can I help you bring that forth out into the world? That's what real development looks like.
Because it's like asking the question, are we making disciples, or are we making disciples of our church? Are we developing leaders, or are we developing greater brand loyalty?
Yep.
Are we advancing the spiritual formation of somebody, or are we advancing somebody from a volunteer to a team leader to a coach to a part-time staff member to into our internship program? Yada yada yada. Just like
It's exactly right, and that's a fear we have to grapple with, because I talk to churches all the time that have that fear. And the reality is, if you're going to develop people really well, and you're going to develop them holistically, and you're going to help them kind of unearth the image of God that's in them, and you're going to help them step into all that God has designed for their life and become holistic, and if you do that, you will lose some of them. Because some of them are going to catch a calling that they didn't even realize they had, and they're going to leave and start another church, or they're going to get out into the business world, or whatever that looks like. And I think that's okay. I think as we develop people well, we will lose some or send some along the way. But I think over the long haul, it will return to us tenfold. Versus if we only approach it with this deficit mindset of saying, I can only develop the people that can meet my needs in the short term.
Yeah.
You will always feel like you're in a deficit if you operate that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the major shadow sides. Again, shadow side, not pitfall, because everything's got a shadow. Of kind of the simple church model, where it was like, all we really have in our church, we have serve on Sunday, we have groups to be a part of, join us on Sunday mornings. And that was kind of like it. And then you do that for 3 to 5 years, and you're like, is this it? Like, I've done this. I'm now a coach. All right. Is that all I have? And one of my mentors, he said, like when you have a kid, like the path is really simple. It's you wake up, you brush your teeth, you have breakfast, you make your bed, you do your things. But maturity, you begin to realize I'm actually a night owl. I stay up a little later. I got to brush my teeth after lunch today. I'm not doing it in the morning at night. The path begins to branch, and most churches, because they're working on an efficiency model, are not able to be able to make space for those branches, because it ruins consistency. It ruins it's hard to keep your brand consistency amongst all those things. And I think just having that open hand of, because that's what we're doing. Like you're Winston-Salem, you've been there. J.D. Greer, gaining by losing. We gain as a church when we lose our people and send them out to go do what God's created them to do.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's so good, man. Well, so let me ask you this. So what you're coaching that you do right now, what type of people, what type of churches will really benefit from jumping on a call with you?
I think it's anybody who has probably been at it for a few years, has kind of got through the honeymoon phase, and is starting to come down off, the adrenaline of launching something.
Yeah.
They're starting to think long term. They're starting to think about legacy. They're starting to think about what does this look like in 10 years, and how do we begin to build today to create something that will still be fruitful 10 years from now. A lot of what we do is around organizational health, just helping people have that long-term view, look at every element of a church or organization, and understand how do we design and build things that are not just going to be operating in this urgency loop, surviving Sunday to Sunday, but how do we build something that's going to be deeply rooted, that's gonna nourish people, that can raise up and develop people, and that can be healthy over the long haul. So that'd probably be right in the sweet spot of where
It's
we
good.
go.
I love that. I love that. That's, again, going back to that podcast I was sharing with you about JMC and Matt Chandler. It's talking about hitting the wall. You hit at some point in time, like what you did in your first 10 years of ministry stops working, and you're hitting the wall right now. Go talk to Greg. How do people find you? How do people connect with your organization? And then also just the things you're doing personally.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Greg Basch. You can find Focus 412 at focus412.com for organizational coaching, and I have some resources as well on my personal site, which is gregbasch.com.
Love that. Love that. And I also love that you do a big year in review. And I am a huge fan of that. Maybe at some point in time, as we get closer to year end, you should come tell us about that, because I think that has been for me one of the most transformational pieces of my journey is stopping and doing a review like that. I'm sure ours is a little bit different, but man, I love the resources you're putting out there. Go jump on his newsletter as well by going to his website, which is Greg Basch, BASCH.com. And get coached up, because, man, when we're all getting coaching, everybody's getting better. We need more coaches. We don't just need to keep just grinding it out. We need to get healthy. So, man, thank you so much for coming on the pod today. I appreciate you helping our leaders grow their ministries through simple strategies and scalable systems. Thank you guys for watching today.